Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Wednesday night in Birth stream with the 2MK team. My voice is being as unreliable as it has been lately in general, but it's quite often that a good match will bring me right out of that state somehow. We're not starting with me today though, and as a result of the voice and that fact, we may not be getting as much talking on this stream. Our topic for today though is the various ways one interacts with the GRD gauge. Whether or not your character actually has any direct benefit, it does at least one thing. Having more gauge means that when you do your drive cancel, you will get more meter for it. While this game does not have EX moves, you should still think about how to use your meter for the things you want, and therefore, what benefit you can get from having more meter available. Whether that be by charging it, moving forward, or finding ways to play neutral that increase the gauge more. So, if you're unfamiliar with this game, you can spend most of your time today watching that little tug of war meter on the bottom of the screen. And figuring out who has what. One of the main things you can recognize right away and pay a lot of attention to is the fact that every time anyone backdashes, in general, their opponent will get a lot of gauge. We are playing Winner Stays On today. This is now our normal, but as it does come up in some other places, figured it was important to point out. And as always, if you are planning to join us for the NA Lounge, you generally will want to have a connection that will give you good link to anyone near the Atlantic Ocean. While we do have a limit on the consecutive wins you can claim in this lounge today before you'll have to drop the bat, it is set to 3 and people are going to be playing a little more seriously than they normally are in terms of, let's call it ruthlessness, their intent to win. Just because the thing that's being worked on today / tested is related to the GRD gauge at the bottom of the screen, and therefore you can't do your testing if you let up too much. Over the years, this game has got a lot of credit for its good tutorial mode, but one of the problems with a tutorial is that once you've gotten into the game and are playing at full strength, speed, whatever, particularly if you come from other fighting games, whether or not you actually understand how to use all of your techniques is much less important than whether or not you understand where to mentally slot them. It is often true that just by using it whenever you can, you get some benefit, but this isn't always a good way to learn it. For some characters it helps, and for others you might need it more in a defensive situation or to maintain some form of control. It's often true, especially in more modern games, that using your meter toward the end of your combos rather than in neutral leads to you having issues in dealing enough damage due to scaling, and often some issues with defense. This is even more complex with the Vorpal state because while it can be used for defense, your general hope is related to doing things like that, managing to get your conversion. But if you get your conversion at the end of the match, it definitely didn't help you enough. I mean, you still probably won the match, but depending on where you are, it implies that you could have had a better chance of doing it a little bit earlier. One of the things we generally try to teach players is that if they've gotten used to the concept of an EX move in any other game, any sort of enhanced special, do your best to think of whatever you need as just more and more forms of that. Because in the end, they're functionally very similar. In fact, sometimes they're almost the same, even if the thing you're doing is a cancel. Many specials change their properties when you cancel them. And in this game, because this also applies to many normals, you can literally get yourself maybe to think about it as simply having an EX version of just a punch. The only things that generally don't cancel well are things that already use meter, so nothing for you to worry about there. This mindset allows you to focus on learning conditions under which to do things. And this is probably the harder part of understanding Vorpal and the GRD gauge. It's quite often true that you can only use it under a very specific set of time-gated conditions. A certain amount of time has to pass before this move becomes available to you, and it's generally not available more than once. This is equally true in other games, but it's not exactly the same conceptually. Here's a good example. My opponent has Vorpal now, and therefore I don't have an option to use this regardless of what I do. But now that I have it, I have to think about what is best to use it on. And to be frank, I didn't think of anything.
This requires you to learn a lot more about watching things. And of course, having Vorpal but having no meter to convert the Vorpal with is not really helpful. This game can, in fact, go so fast when you are fighting someone who actually understands your stuff that without longer combos to freeze the situation, combos that in many cases one must actually focus on yourself, you might not be able to keep track of when you need to do these things. This is also something I come across when fighting other people who are quite good at the game, but are not necessarily expecting me to be able to keep them having to focus in neutral. So for me, I often use that same option for nothing other than a distraction. But then again, a lot of what I do with Seth is distractions. That is probably the most useful version of that I have. Because that move has very, very little conversions from my standard style of flow. And therefore getting a bigger payoff can't be anything but good for me. So that's a good concept for a first step. It's also a situation in which I have a lot of time to think about it. I've managed to knock down the opponent, I know I can land just the dive, because doing anything else after it doesn't work, Seth takes too long to recover. So I hit the button to do the cancel, and I therefore get what could be considered an EX dive. Took too long. I don't think I had time to do the... There we go. You can of course use it to protect yourself in bad situations as well.
資理を求めることに躊躇なく力を振るう浅ましき義胆の者よ。リヒトクライスの執行官の名においてこの一帯からの即刻の退去を命じます。あなたとて命は惜しいはずです。速やかに立ち去りなさい。
待ち焦がれたぞ。
定めに従い
時を
光の鉄槌を。
ファーストクローズディバイド。
遅いです。停戦。ここからです。ディバインスラックします。ここで停戦旋回。
まだまだよ。
惜しいです。
けよ。
ここで停戦。ディバインスラスト。ディバインスラスト。ディバインスラスト。
無駄だ。
惜しいです。エバージョン。遅いです。
まだまだ生きた。
天戦艦。勝敗は決しました。
ウィンナーオリエ。セカンドクローズディバイド。
ゆるいぞ。
ここです天戦。
風かし。
最後まで分かり合えてみせる。足元天戦シックアンドカット。耐えてみせる。耐えてみせる。足元がおろして断罪。
逃がさここだ。
ここで天戦旋回見えますか。セークリッドファイヤー。遅いです。
釣れる。暗い。
ここからです。スラム全員シセークリッドアロー。足元がこれだ。足元天戦シックアンドカット。
逃がさ。
ここで天戦旋回見えますか。セークリッドファイヤー。耐えてみせる。油断します。
ブレイクダウン。
これで
ウィンナ
よかったの。
ーオリエ。
正義の名のもとにあなたを救済し
ファ
ます。
ーストクローズディバイド。
これならどうです。油断します。ディバインスラスト遅いです。足元がおろしです。停戦。やりますね。停戦。断罪。これならどうです。 まだ終わってはいません。
オリエセカンドクローズディバイド
断罪。まだまだ。停戦。ここからです。ここです。断言ます。セークリッドファイヤー。足元停戦。ここです。
サードクローズディバイド
惜しいです。耐えてみせる。耐えてみせる。行きます。油断します。
ブレイクダウンウィナーオリエ
一体なぜあなたがここに？
ファーストクローズディバイド
ここです。エヴァージェンここです。停戦。ここです。ダンシング&パスト。そや。やりますね。ここです。停戦。ここです。ダンシング&パスト。チェインシフト。ここです。ここ。エヴァージェン停戦。行きます。もさ。エヴァージェン行きます。セークリッドアロー。
セクシー
ゴールド。エヴァージェン落ちます。行きました。勝敗は決して
セカンドクローズディバイド
ここです。ダンシング&見えました。セークリッドファイヤー。行きなさい。行きます。ここです。遅いです。ここです。耐えてみせる。チェインシフト。
ウィナーミカサードクローズディ ディバイド
ここから上です。やりますね。下足元が降りきます。足元が降りてきます。足元でやりますね。行きます行きます。降りた受けるよいしょここですランチャーチェインシスディバインスラック上です見えますかセイクリスラック足元がうるせえエヴァーここですやりますね
ブレイクダウン
やったやった一体なぜあなたがここに
ファーストクローズディバイド
ディバインスラックここです支柱をこれならどうですかディバインスラック足元が降りていきます訂正断罪ここですエヴァここですランチパッドいきますここですいきます弾くここですランチ見えますかセイクリストファイヤー支柱を落ちますここ断罪ここです行きなさい行きますまだまだ勝敗は決しました
セカンドクローズディバイド
やりますね送ります遅いですまだまだここですエヴァージョンここですランチ見えますかチェンジ行きますこれならどうですした株式タイトル処置見抜く無効化するやりますね株式したエヴァージョン支柱はここです行きますそや捕まえた見抜くこちらにそんな
ウィナーミカ
Even if one doesn't follow the flow of the match as dictated by the Vorpal gauge, in general it's always true that if your opponent has gained more options, you have to at least somewhat care about those options unless you just have such strong matchup against them that it can be ignored. So in this case, Mika having Vorpal, despite it not giving her any other actual things, means that she can push a little bit harder. Matchup-wise though, Oria kind of ignores this. Pushing harder is not necessarily going to grant Mika much benefit. Whereas Oria benefits quite a lot more from having this option, because it allows her to cancel so many more things, and gives her so much available meter. That said, Vorpal only lasts, let's say, for a few seconds. It's probably 10, I believe. So you have to spend more time thinking about whether or not you even have the time to deal with it, given your other interactions. This game is able to rapidly increase the stack of things you have to understand and pay attention to. And it's obviously better to build that up from some base that you prefer, or some base that you've learned somewhere if you are the type that learns specific things from outside sources. But it's basically impossible to escape it altogether. This matchup, for example, is one where my style of Seth does not tend to build much gauge. But Seth can ignore a lot of Mika's offense and generally doesn't have a problem except when she's just too close all the time. So the act of getting out of that position where she is too close all the time is the one that ends up with the loss of the Vorpal. Once you do have it, you generally try to stick to it as long as you can. But the opponent knows this and just has to keep up their focus on your position, mostly. Technically, therefore, using it too much will limit your positioning. Even though Seth's way of using Vorpal doesn't necessarily lead to more stuff happening as a whole,
Second close. Divide.
Unfortunately, focus does tend to drop eventually, and I feel as if we're both just flying around the screen more so than we are targeting cleanly. This will happen as soon as you meet someone of your general skill level in most games of this type.
セカンドクローズディバイド
仕留めかけてもらったそこだ後期もらった引くそこだ捕らえられまいなかなか前知る後期捕らえられまい貫く避けろその程度なかなか屈辱を見切れるかついてこ死を前夜はまだ終わらない
ウィンセット
消えろそして二度と俺の前にその姿
A game with too much complexity, with too many different options to use, can leave you confused if those options all rely on different
ファー
meters.
ストクローズディバイド
You might get the impression that this is a game like that, but it really isn't so much so.
なかなかのコース捕らえられまい捕らえられまい貫く後期もらったそこだかけ遅い後期その程度捕らえられまい貫くまだまだもらった捕らえられまい口どこ後期もらった死ぬ前拍子抜けだ
ウィンセットセカンドクローズディバイド
警備検知後期捕らえられない無駄それなりにもらった来い深く甘い後期そこだなかなかのそこだ後期円数のペネトレイト後期もらったそこだ
Sometimes when I play this character, I just feel like I'm just actually this character because I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that the next thing that happens is the thing that was supposed to happen. What if it was laggy? One of the main things that Seth would use it in this matchup for, therefore, is preventing being punished. But when you're basically telling yourself you can only prevent being punished every 10 seconds, you have to be really ready for a lot of things. And not only must you do this right, you have to do it in the time frame you have available to you. Otherwise, you're just chasing at your opponent for nothing.
次は仕留めそこで捉える後期見切れるそこで
One thing it does help with though is setting up a specific type of offensive situation. That happens because of my opponent's specific way of defense. Just like heat and similar things, it is an invincible enough wake-up to resolve some problems. Almost there, but my opponent backdashed and still got the hit on me because I chased it correctly. I keep on mistiming the throws because there is throw invincibility in this game on Wake Up, and therefore you have to do a bit more trickery in order to actually get said Wake Up throw. The easier answer is, of course, to not play like this at all. Here's a state where you can't build it up even, which can make your life quite hard, obviously. Being locked into that state can make it even harder to do anything else, And it makes this portion of the game kind of silly, because if you're both in it, then no one is actually gaining any gauge.
闇に飲まれよ屈辱をさらす銃を前唱え好奇なかなか次はくだらかけついてこれ好奇
Unnecessary.
そこで断ち切るかける銃を前かけるもらった無駄した見切れるか止め大爆拍子抜けだ
セカンドクローズディバイド
捉えかけて大爆だな捉えられまい闇になかなかにその程度なかなかにそこで捉えかけるもらったそこで
まだ終わってはいません。
こんな小石につまずくとは
サードクローズディバイド
大爆のセグメント好奇避けろ無駄捉えられまいそこで
まだまだ。
くだら銃を前かける闇に飲まれ銃を前大爆巻いて散れかける
ここから一人。
好奇次は何見え見えだくだら
ここから一人。
闇に飲まれよくだら戯れはここまでだ先生のペネトレイト
やりますね。
背負ったものの差だ
ウィンセット
落ちても闇
I
に
think that
属
does
す
count as 3 wins.
うつろの夜の秩序を守るが定め
Yep. So we rotate back around to this again, meaning that even more chance to practice the specific thing.
"一体なぜあなたがここに?"
ファーストクローズディバイド
やりますよ。行きなさい。行きます。まだまだ上です。行きれます。行きます。大だ。胸を開くのじゃ。ここです。全速前進。
セカンドクローズディバイド
行きます。ここです。ここです。やります。
サードクローズディバイド
行きます行きます行きますここです向こうから軸そんなした向こうがゴール切りました一体なぜあなたがここに？
ファーストクローズディバイド
防御ディバインスラックディバインスラックそんなまだまだセークレットアートスキル防御射抜く射抜くディバインスラック落ちなさい行きなさいディバインスラックディバインスラックここです
カウンターセカンドクローズディバイド
足元が折れてきてますか？
サードクローズディバイド
セークレットアート向こうから足元で行きなさい。落ちなさい。
ブレイクダウン
If you've ever wanted to play a fighting game with the maximum number of complex interactions, I feel like this is it. It seems that the two topics of stream didn't exactly gel with each other well, since there's less to talk about relative to the gauge, when both people are going all out to the point where you can't easily predict the gauge. Sometimes you just play games a little more casually. This doesn't necessarily have to do with learning combos. In fact, one can spend your time learning combos and end up being extremely casual at a game. But there is at least some benefit to doing them anyway. Similarly, you can be casual simply because you don't understand enough in the first place. Yeah, see? More crazy interactions happening everywhere. Due to the high mobility of certain characters in the game, that sort of thing comes up fairly often. Purely because both are trying to hit the current position of their opponent, and then they go sailing past each other. But one way or another, we are actually coming to the end of our stream for the night. Hopefully, we will be able to continue helping people with their practice through our bots. You can find those at 2-mk.org. In this case under UNIST instead of UNCLR for unclear. And whether or not we are streaming can be found on our Twitter 2_MK_FGC at about 7:30 Eastern every day. Also Central European time. If you see no tweet by about 7:40, assume that no stream is happening. Tomorrow you can expect to see our Feeling Thursday King of Fighters 15 content, and on the day after that even more King of Fighters because we will have finished the testing for our first bot that we've released, our Iori bot, meant to basically help with some fundamentals and punishes that we've been noticing come up quite a lot when trying to fight players who have more experience with the game. So if you're feeling like you're not really confident in jumping in and don't have anyone in particular to play with, we managed to get the bot down to a form of something easy enough that you shouldn't have too much trouble in putting it to the point where it helps at least. So you can look out for that on Friday. On Saturday we will probably still have our 60 times Dead or Alive 6 Battle Lounge, and on Sunday we've still got 2 more weeks of Absolver to go before the release of DNF Duel. Monday will of course be Street Fighter V, and the Tuesday melt will follow that, bringing us back to another Wednesday night in Birth. But even though this lounge is going to stay open, we have come to the end of our stream for the night. This has been Rillian, 142MK. Good luck with your training and good night everyone.